I have shared with you many stories that change lives. Let me share with you another story, one that might just change how you see life forever. This story is a perfect example that stories are not only for entertainment. And today's tale is the perfect example of that. The story is called Attempt, which means trying. Maybe you won't like my voice. Maybe you won't like the way I tell it. But I can promise you this, from the very beginning to the very end, you will stay connected to this story. And when it ends, you will carry something in your heart. Something that may stay with you for a long time. Something that may live in your memory forever. In the heart of Turkey, within the peaceful walls of a private school, life seemed ordinary. A place where laughter, whispers, and ambition lived together under one roof. Inside one classroom, a group of children sit restlessly, waiting for the teacher. Among them stands Ilgar, sharp, confident, with that glint in his eyes that always promised mischief. He leans toward his friends and whispers, half smiling, "Be careful, she's about to come. Get ready." Moments later, the door creaks open. The teacher enters, her presence instantly commanding the room. The children rise in unison, voices bright and polite. "Good morning, ma'am." But before order can settle, Ilgar's voice slices through the silence. "Ma'am, I heard you gave us a holiday today. Is it true?" Laughter ripples through the class, and one by one, his classmates join in, cheering, clapping, thanking her for something she never said. The teacher freezes, bewildered, her brows knit together as she scolds. "What kind of nonsense is this? Sit down." The laughter fades. The room grows still. Yet Ilgar remains standing, tall, silent, his smile almost daring her to react. The teacher's voice sharpens, frustration thick in her tone. "Everything has a limit, young man." The clock ticks louder in the tense silence. Then suddenly, the class begins a countdown. The sound builds, echoing off the walls, until at 1, the room explodes in cheers. The teacher's patience snaps. "Enough," she cries. But Ilgar's laughter rises above it all. "I won the bet," he declares, triumph glowing on his face. Fury burns in the teacher's eyes. She grabs his wrist, shaking with disbelief. "Ilgar, what kind of disrespect is this?" But Ilgar pulls away, his pride swelling larger than his sense. "How dare you touch me? This is a private school, my grandfather's school. I'll have you fired." For a moment, the teacher says nothing. Then she straightens, her voice trembling but firm. "Everything has a limit. I will not sacrifice my self-respect to work here." With quiet dignity, she gathers her things, walks out, and closes the door behind her. And yet, Ilgar doesn't feel the weight of what just happened. He turns to his friends with a grin, full of careless pride. "After school," he boasts, "I'm taking my close friends to a 5-star hotel. It's already booked." His words hang in the air, confident, arrogant, certain. None of them know yet that this boy, Ilgar, will soon learn the true cost of pride, because he is the soul at the heart of this story. After school, the golden light of the Turkish afternoon bathed the courtyard in warmth, stretching long shadows across the ground. Ilgar and his friends burst out of the building, their laughter echoing through the still air, wild, careless, dripping with privilege. They piled into the school van, still teasing and bragging about the prank they had pulled earlier. For them, the world was simple, a playground that always bent to their will. Halfway through the ride, Ilgar's restless grin returned. He leaned forward suddenly and shouted, "Stop the van." The driver blinked, startled, but before he could say a word, the boys had already jumped out, their shoes hitting the dusty road with youthful arrogance. "Let's walk from here," Ilgar said, his tone filled with mischief. They laughed, loud and unrestrained, as if nothing in life could ever touch them. When one of the boys pointed down a narrow alley, saying it would save time, another hesitated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Poor people live there. he warned nervously. "If they see our clothes, they might stop us." Ilgar only smirked, a cold glint in his eye. "Poor people," he said, almost spitting the words. "They wouldn't dare." And with that, he stepped into the alley, his friends following like shadows behind him. The lane was silent and heavy with dust. Cracked walls leaned over the path like old secrets, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and sweat. Then, a sudden noise. A clay water jar rolled across the uneven road, spinning until it struck Ilgar's foot. He stumbled, startled. Moments later, a small boy came running, no older than 10, his face flushed, arms full of empty bottles. He stopped in front of Ilgar, breathless and afraid. "I'm sorry, sir, please forgive me," he stammered. But Ilgar's pride rose like a storm. His eyes narrowed. "Look what you've done, you useless brat," he shouted. Laughter erupted behind him, sharp, cruel, echoing off the walls. Yusuf, the little boy, lowered his head, whispering, "I didn't mean to, it was an accident." Ilgar wasn't listening. He unzipped his bag slowly, pulling out a metal compass, its sharp tip glinting in the fading light. "Let's see how you feel," he said coldly, "when I make a hole in your precious jar." Yusuf's eyes filled with fear. "Please don't," he begged softly. "That bottle is how I earn money for my family." But Ilgar's smile only grew darker. "Sorry isn't enough," he sneered. "If you want forgiveness, you'll have to earn it. Make it sound like a donkey, loud enough for everyone to hear." The other boys laughed again, feeding off his cruelty. Yusuf stood frozen, his small fist trembling, his voice breaking as he said, "My dignity means more to me than money." Ilgar's face twisted with disdain. "And that," he said, kicking the bottle hard, "is why you'll always be poor." The jar clattered down the alley, bouncing off the stones until it vanished. Yusuf ran after it, a small, desperate figure disappearing into the dust. Behind him, the laughter of the rich boys rang out once more, heartless and hollow, fading into the heavy silence that followed. And in that silence, something shifted. For the first time, the air around Ilgar felt colder. Though he had everything, wealth, pride, and power, there was a hollow space inside him that even laughter couldn't fill. Because a heart without empathy is a heart already empty. In the middle of everything, the laughter, the noise, the careless joy of youth, Ilgar's phone suddenly buzzed. The sound cut through the air like a quiet alarm, sharp and unexpected. It was the latest iPhone, a gift from his mother on his last birthday. The screen lit up with her name. Without thinking, he answered. But the moment he heard the voice on the other end, the world seemed to stop. The sound around him faded. The laughter of his friends became distant, like echoes from another world. His heart pounded in his chest. His hands began to tremble. His legs felt weak. Slowly, almost unconsciously, he lowered the phone from his ear, his eyes blank, his breath caught halfway. The other boys noticed the change instantly. Their smiles faded. "What happened, Ilgar?" one of them asked, stepping closer. But Ilgar didn't respond. He stood there, motionless, staring up at the pale afternoon sky, as if searching for something that was no longer there. His lips parted, but the words came out as a whisper, broken, trembling, soaked in disbelief. "Father has passed away." The silence that followed was unbearable. The street, the sunlight, even the wind, everything seemed to pause with him. In that single moment, the boy who once laughed at others' pain felt a kind of sorrow that no wealth could shield him from. A quiet hillside, where the wind whispers through rows of marble stones. Ilgar's father is being laid to rest. The family stands together in silence. His mother, dressed in black, clutches a white handkerchief as if it were her last thread of strength. His younger siblings huddle beside her, their eyes wide and empty. Near the grave stands a serious-looking man in a dark suit, the family's longtime lawyer, speaking softly, his tone measured and official. Everything feels distant, unreal. The priest's final prayer fades into the cold afternoon air. Suddenly, Ilgar breaks away. Without warning, he turns and runs, his shoes scattering pebbles across the ground. His mother calls out his name, her voice echoing across the cemetery, but he doesn't stop. Her cries grow fainter as he disappears beyond the gates. A few moments later, he reappears, breathless, his eyes locking briefly with the lawyer's. The man says nothing, only watches in silence, his face unreadable. Ilgar hesitates, then runs again, this time all the way home. At the gate, an elderly housemaid, once their loyal caretaker, sees him rush past. "Young master," she calls, but he's already gone, racing up the stairs to his room. There, he throws himself onto the bed, his chest heaving, tears spilling uncontrollably. "Father, why did you leave me?" he cries out, his voice breaking. On the bedside table, a framed photo of his father catches the afternoon light. With trembling hands, Ilgar lifts it close, whispering through his tears, "Who will hold me now when I sleep? How could you leave me like this?" His sobs fill the room, raw and endless. Downstairs, the television quietly announces the news of his father's passing. A calm, detached voice that contrasts painfully with the storm inside the boy's heart. Soon, the mourners return from the cemetery. The caretakers stand by the door, bowing respectfully as guests arrive. Among them is Ilgar's uncle, Hyder, who stays close to his grieving sister. She looks around, worried. "Where is Ilgar?" she asks softly. One caretaker answers, "He's locked himself in his room, ma'am. We've knocked many times. He won't open." Upstairs, the boy still clings to his father's photograph. His tears won't stop. His small body shakes from exhaustion, grief pressing down until he can barely breathe. Uncle Hyder walks to his door, his voice gentle. "Ilgar, my boy, come eat something." But Ilgar, his voice hoarse from crying, shouts through the door, "Go away. Leave me alone." Hyder pauses, silent for a moment, then quietly steps back. He says nothing more, leaving the boy alone, cradled in the darkness of his sorrow. The next morning dawns pale and silent. Sunlight filters weakly through the tall windows of the living room, settling on the heavy oak table where the family lawyer now sits across from Ilgar's mother. His posture is firm, his voice measured, each word chosen with precision, as though weighed before it was spoken. "The children," he begins, "are still too young to manage any of this. When they come of age, they will inherit what their father left behind. But until then, the estate, the company, the properties, all of it, legally belongs to you." His tone is professional, but the air between them feels heavy, almost fragile. Across the table, Ilgar's mother listens quietly, her black veil half shadowing her face. As the lawyer continues, a silent understanding flickers between her and her brother, Hyder. Their eyes meet for just a second, long enough to hint at something beneath the surface, then drift apart as if nothing happened. The lawyer pauses, his gaze shifting between them, aware but unwilling to pry. Instead, he leans back slightly and asks, "Where is Ilgar?" The question lingers in the quiet room. Ilgar's mother lowers her eyes. "He hasn't come out," she says softly. "He won't talk to anyone." The lawyer nods slowly, then folds his papers together. "Ilgar has no legal claim to the estate at this time," he says plainly, "but I trust you'll take care of him." For a brief moment, her lips curve into the faintest smile, a fragile mix of sorrow and strength. "Of course," she whispers, her voice trembling like glass. In that moment, it seems like a promise, but one the house itself does not believe. A week passes in silence. The mansion feels emptier now. Rooms echo with quiet memories, and Ilgar spends his days alone in his room, the curtains drawn. At his study table, beneath the faint glow of a desk lamp, he writes a letter, not to the living, but to the one who's gone. His small hands tremble as the pen moves across the paper, each word pressed deep into the page, as though carving grief into time itself. "Father," he writes, "it's been a week since you left me. I still cry every day. I can't go to school. I can't think of anything but you." The ink smudges where his tears fall. Outside, the evening light fades, wrapping the house in a quiet kind of sorrow. Just then, the door opens. Uncle Hyder steps in first, his face drawn and uneasy. Behind him stands a tall man, unfamiliar, dressed in dark clothes that match his cold expression. There's something about his eyes, sharp, commanding, dangerous. His voice cuts through the room like a blade. "Pack your things," he says flatly. "You're coming with me." Ilgar freezes, startled. "Why should I go with you?" he snaps, his young voice cracking with anger and fear. The man doesn't answer. He simply walks to the wardrobe, opens it, and starts pulling out Ilgar's clothes. "Stop!" Ilgar cries, trying to push him back, but the man turns, his hand closing around the boy's neck, tight and unyielding. The air leaves Ilgar's chest. The man leans closer, his tone low and threatening. "Enough. You don't belong here. This isn't your home. We're taking you back to where you came from. And if you scream, you'll regret it." Ilgar's eyes widen with terror. He struggles to breathe, his voice breaking into a trembling whisper. "I'm sorry." The man lets go, leaving Ilgar gasping, a frightened child in a world that has suddenly turned cold and cruel. Ilgar's small footsteps echo down the grand staircase, each step heavier than the last. As he reaches the bottom, he finds the house unusually crowded, caretakers, relatives, even neighbors standing quietly in the hall. No one speaks. Their faces are tight with unease, their eyes lowered, as if they already know what's about to happen, but are powerless to stop it. The air feels thick, suffocating. Confusion flickers in Ilgar's eyes. He turns, searching for comfort in the only place that ever felt safe, his mother. "Mother," his voice trembles, breaking the silence. "What's happening? Did I do something wrong? Where is this man taking me?" But she doesn't turn. She stands still, her back rigid, her hands clutching a handkerchief that's already damp with tears. The silence cuts deeper than any answer could. Desperate, Ilgar runs to her, tugging at her arm. "Mother, please say something. If you send me away, where will I go?" His voice cracks under the weight of fear. Still, she doesn't move. Her shoulders tremble, just once, before going still again. Then, the stranger steps forward, his grip rough and final as he seizes Ilgar's arm. The boy twists around, eyes darting toward his uncle. "Uncle Hyder," he pleads, "please do something." But his uncle only lifts a hand, a cold, dismissive gesture that ends everything. "Take him." And just like that, the truth crashes down. No one will stop this. No one will speak for him. As they drag him toward the door, Ilgar's cries echo through the house, the sound of innocence being torn from the place it once called home. His voice fades down the long marble corridor, leaving behind a silence so deep, it feels like the house itself is grieving. A blue car winds slowly through the narrow streets of the old city, its tires crunching over uneven pavement, stirring faint clouds of dust in the fading afternoon light. The ride feels endless, every turn taking Ilgar farther from the life he once knew. Finally, the car stops in front of a small, weathered house with peeling paint and cracked walls that tell stories of struggle and time. The man steps out first, his movements sharp and impatient. He opens the back door and orders Ilgar to get out. The boy hesitates, clutching his small bag, his eyes darting toward the unfamiliar house. The man raises his voice, calling out, "Is anyone here?" For a few long seconds, there's only silence, the kind that makes the air feel heavy. Then, 3 children appear at the doorway, peeking out from behind the wooden frame, their faces smeared with dust and curiosity. The man gestures toward them. "Go call your mother," he says sternly. One of the children runs inside. Moments later, a woman steps out, her face weary, her dress stained from work. She wipes her hands and apologizes softly. "I didn't hear you call." Her voice carries both strength and exhaustion. The man wastes no time. "I've come to deliver your son," he says coldly. "Mr. Behesh has passed away." The woman freezes, her breath catching. Her voice trembles as she murmurs, "So, the fear I've carried all these years has finally come true." Her name is Munzarin. The man pulls a folded letter from his pocket and hands it to her. "Everything is written here," he says. "Begum Sahiba explained it all." Munzarin nods quietly, clutching the paper as if it burns in her hand. Without another word, the man turns and walks back toward the car. But Ilgar, desperate, heart pounding, runs after him. "Wait," he cries. The man pushes him aside and gets into the car. The engine roars to life. Dust and silence follow as the car disappears down the road, leaving Ilgar standing alone. He chases it for as long as his legs can carry him, until he collapses on the rough, sun-baked street, breathless, lost, and abandoned. The three children approach slowly, forming a small circle around him. One whispers, "Are you our brother?" Another answers quickly, "No, he's our stepbrother." Before Ilgar can respond, Munzarin's sharp voice cuts through the air. "What's all this noise? Get inside now." The children scatter, vanishing into the house. Then her eyes fall on Ilgar, tired, cold, unyielding. "You too," she snaps. "Come inside." And for the first time, Ilgar steps into a house that doesn't feel like home. The room feels suffocating, small, dark, and thick with the smell of old wood and damp air. Ilgar stands in the center, his chest heaving, disbelief written all over his young face. His voice trembles between anger and despair. "How can I live in a place this tiny? This is impossible." The walls seem to close in on him, as if mocking his helplessness. Munzarin, her expression half amused, half cruel, turns slowly toward him. There's a sharp glint in her eyes, the kind born from years of bitterness. "Oh really?" she says, her tone dripping with mockery. "Then tell me, young master, why did they toss you out of that mansion? Your precious stepmother played her game well. The property's hers now." Ilgar's face flushes with rage. His fists tighten. "Don't you dare speak about my mother like that," he yells, his voice breaking under the weight of betrayal. But Munzarin only smirks, stepping closer. Her voice hardens, every word like a blade. "I'm not saying anything that isn't true. You're not really anyone's child. Not Behesh Sahib's, not hers. Your father adopted you because they couldn't have children. But when she finally did, 2 of them, her own flesh and blood, everything changed. Still, your father stood by you, loved you as if you were his own. But now he's gone." She pauses, her eyes cold and unfeeling. "And your mother saw her chance. She threw you out because you have no legal right to that house. None at all. And if I were her," she leans in, her voice lowering to a cruel whisper, "I'd have done the same. In this world, boy, money is everything." Ilgar stands frozen. Her words echo through him, sharp and relentless, tearing at the fragile pieces of faith he still clung to. The truth, or what sounds like it, crushes him slowly, leaving only a hollow silence between them. Munzarin exhales sharply, the exhaustion in her tone wrapped with cold indifference. She points toward the folded letter lying on the table. "If you don't believe me," she says flatly, "read it yourself. Everything is written there." Ilgar hesitates. His fingers tremble as he picks up the letter. The paper feels heavy, as though every word within it carries a truth too painful to face. He unfolds it slowly, his eyes tracing the lines, but the meaning blurs beneath the sting of tears. Before he can reach the end, Munzarin's voice slices through the tense silence from the kitchen. "Wonderful," she snaps, her voice rising in irritation. "I've burned the rice trying to talk to you." Her footsteps thunder across the floor as she storms past him, muttering under her breath. But Ilgar doesn't move. He sits frozen, the letter still clutched in his shaking hands. His heart feels like it's sinking deeper and deeper, buried under the weight of words he can no longer unhear. Behind him, a faint rustle breaks the stillness. The children, wide-eyed and curious, creep closer to his worn travel bag. They whisper, giggle, then unzip it carefully. Inside, they find what to them seems like treasure: books with neat covers, folded clothes, a few small keepsakes. Little Moose's face lights up as he pulls out a red sweater, soft and bright under the dim light. He holds it up proudly, eyes gleaming. The others gather around, their laughter soft but full of wonder. They've never touched anything so fine before. And in that quiet, uneven moment, as Ilgar sits in silence, lost in heartbreak, the world around him keeps moving, unaware that something inside him is already broken. ChatGPT said. Munzarin storms back into the room, her eyes blazing with fury. "What do you think you're doing? Put that down," she shouts, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. The children freeze, startled, their little hands still clutching Ilgar's things. Without hesitation, she lunges forward, yanking the sweater from Moose's hands, snatching up the scattered clothes and books one by one. The children stumble backward, fear flashing across their faces as she waves them off with sharp, angry gestures. "Out, all of you. Go finish your chores before I lose my temper," she snaps. The sound of hurried footsteps fills the room as the children rush away, leaving behind a heavy, uneasy silence. Ilgar doesn't move. He just sits there, eyes fixed on the floor, his heart sinking under the weight of everything he's lost. The letter lies crumpled beside him, the truth written in black ink, now smeared with the tremor of his hands. For the first time, he begins to wonder if his whole life had been nothing but a borrowed dream. Then, breaking the silence, a weak, trembling voice echoes from somewhere deep inside the house, fragile and tired. "Munzarin, please give me something to eat. I'm starving." The words hang in the air like a ghostly whisper. Munzarin freezes, her expression shifting from anger to something cold and hard. Slowly, she turns toward Ilgar, her eyes narrowing into a cruel sneer. "You hear that?" she says bitterly. "That's your real father calling you." Ilgar looks up, startled and confused. "My father," he murmurs. But before he can say another word, Munzarin grabs his wrist, her grip firm and unyielding. "Come on," she says sharply. "Go on, meet your maker." Without giving him a chance to resist, she drags him toward a narrow, dimly lit hallway. The walls close in around them, the air thick with dust and silence. At the end of the passage stands a small, dark room, and behind that door waits a truth that will change everything Ilgar thought he knew. Inside the small, dimly lit room, the air feels thick, heavy with the scent of old medicine and forgotten pain. On a narrow bed lies a man whose body seems more shadow than flesh. His skin is pale, stretched thin over bones that tremble with every shallow breath. His eyes, once windows to a life perhaps filled with strength, now stare blankly into nothing, clouded by blindness and years of suffering. Ilgar stops at the doorway, frozen in disbelief. The sight before him feels unreal, almost cruel. His hands tremble as his gaze drifts over the cracked walls, the peeling paint, the faint sound of a leaky tap echoing somewhere in the distance. Behind him, Munzarin's voice slices through the silence, dripping with venom. "You studied in private schools, wore fine clothes, rode in cars that cost more than this entire house. But this," she gestures toward the bed, her tone cold and cutting, "this is your real identity. Go on, take a good look at your father." The frail man on the bed stirs weakly, reaching out with trembling fingers toward a small piece of bread lying on a metal plate. His hand misses it once, twice, before finally brushing against it. Munzarin snatches it away, snapping sharply, "You'll choke if you eat like that." Her voice trembles with exhaustion and bitterness. Then, almost to herself, she mutters, "Once he worked like a mule to feed us. Then one day, he fell from a 3-story building. They said he was dead." Her eyes harden as she glances at Ilgar. But no, the curse lived on. First, he lost his legs, then his sight. And since then, I've been dragging this broken life along. She exhales slowly, her anger fading into a sigh of defeat. Bihesh Sahib used to send money every month. That's how he managed to survive. But now, her voice drops to a whisper, heavy with despair. Now even that has stopped. Ilgar's father slowly lifts his trembling hand, searching for the warmth of the boy standing before him. His fingers brush against Ilgar's, and a faint, fragile smile appears on his worn face. His blind eyes quiver, trying to understand what his heart already feels. In a voice cracked with age and weakness, he whispers, "Whose hand is this?" Then, struggling to recall, he begins naming his children one by one. Musa? Kareem? No, this doesn't feel right. His confusion deepens until Munzarin's voice rises softly from behind, calm, almost pitying. "It's not them," she says. "It's your son from the first marriage, the one you gave away to Mr. Hassan Bey. He grew up in comfort, in a rich man's house, with a new name and a new life." The old man freezes. His breath catches between disbelief and trembling hope. Then, in a voice heavy with wonder, he cries out, "Hassan!" His frail arms open wide, pulling Ilgar close. "My son, my lost son," he murmurs, his tears soaking the boy's shoulder. Years of pain, guilt, and longing pour out in a single embrace. A father clinging to the last piece of his broken past. Ilgar, stunned but moved, wraps his arms around him. For a moment, everything stops. No bitterness, no shouting, only the heartbeat of two souls reuniting after a lifetime apart. And in that stillness, the truth unfolds. The cruel woman who runs this house with a stone heart isn't Ilgar's real mother. His true mother died, giving birth to him. Later, his father married Munzarin, the woman who now keeps him as little more than a burden under her roof. The room fades. The harsh light dims into a golden haze. Ilgar is no longer in that cramped, suffocating house. He's somewhere softer, warmer. He's dreaming. When his eyes open, he's back in his old home, the one filled with laughter, comfort, and sunlight spilling through tall windows. The world feels alive again. Birds sing outside. A faint smell of tea lingers in the air. He steps out into the yard, and there, sitting under a tree with a newspaper in his hand, is his father, alive, smiling as if nothing ever changed. Overcome, Ilgar runs to him, falling to his knees and laying his head on his father's lap. "Father," he whispers through tears, "after you died, Mother threw me out. I've been living in a tiny, dark room ever since." His father looks down, eyes gentle, and strokes his hair with a love that feels almost holy. But slowly, painfully, the dream begins to fade. The sunlight turns pale, the warmth disappears. The illusion shatters. Cold water splashes across his face. Ilgar gasps and opens his eyes. Reality hits hard. He's back in Munzarin's house. Her sharp voice fills the air. "Well, look who's finally awake. Our little prince. Should I bring you a breakfast menu too?" The children burst out laughing, clapping their hands in mockery. Still half lost in his dream, Ilgar answers softly, "Yes, bread, butter, and maybe some." But before he can finish, Munzarin snaps, "A menu? You're lucky if there's bread at all." The children's laughter grows louder, echoing through the small house. Ilgar lowers his head, cheeks burning with shame, his heart aching for the dream that slipped away. Munzarin slams a single metal plate onto the rickety table. The clatter echoes through the small room, followed by her cold, commanding voice. Eat quickly, she snaps. Everyone's got work to do. On the plate lies a meager portion. A few crumbs of bread, a handful of rice, barely enough for 4 hungry mouths. What follows isn't breakfast, it's a desperate scramble. The children rush forward, their hands darting like frightened birds, fighting for every last scrap. The air fills with the sound of chewing, arguing, and the dull scrape of spoons on metal. Ilgar sits apart, frozen in disbelief. His stomach twists with hunger, but his pride holds him still. When he finally reaches for a small piece of bread, another hand snatches it first. He pulls back quietly, his eyes wide with the kind of shock only the privileged ever feel when they first taste hardship. He lowers his gaze, unsure how to exist in this world where even a meal must be fought for. Outside, through the morning haze, a dark car sits parked across the street. The family lawyer watches from within, his expression unreadable, a man torn between duty and guilt. Inside, Munzarin finishes her meal in silence, then rises sharply. That's enough. Everyone move. You're already late. Her voice slices through the noise, scattering the children like startled birds. They rush to get ready, bumping into one another as they grab bags and scarves. Without a word, she walks over to Ilgar and snatches away his untouched plate. The single bite he might have had is gone. He looks up for just a moment, not angry, not defiant, just quietly broken. As the last child runs out the door, Ilgar remains seated, staring at the empty table. The hollow ache in his stomach blends with something deeper, the slow, painful hunger of a heart that's beginning to understand what it means to be alone. Later, Munjin stood in the narrow, cracked doorway of her home, her face hardened by years of struggle, her eyes scanning the 3 little lives that depended on her. Dust hung in the air, the kind that never really left the slums, and the sound of distant traffic echoed like an endless reminder of the world outside, a world that gave little and took much. She gathered her children close, her tone half motherly, half commanding. First, she looked at her eldest son, a thin, tired boy clutching a few bottles of water in a worn-out plastic bag. Munjin spoke with calculated precision, explaining that he must sell each bottle for 100 rupees. If someone refused and offered 70, he should take it without complaint. Don't waste time arguing, she said. Every coin counts. Her eyes shifted toward the busy intersection beyond their alley. That's where he would stand, among the swirling smoke, the honking horns, the endless stream of cars, because pity, she knew, was easier to find in traffic than in open streets. Then her gaze fell on her daughter, a girl barely old enough to understand the cruelty of her mother's instructions. Munjin pressed a handful of handkerchiefs in her small, trembling palms. She leaned close, whispering every word she had taught her by heart. How to approach strangers, how to smile just enough to soften their hearts, what exact words to say so that guilt would do the rest. The girl's wide eyes flickered with both fear and obedience. She didn't know what it meant to earn, only that her mother's voice left no room for refusal. Lastly, Munjin turned to the youngest, little Musa. He couldn't have been more than 5, his cheeks still round with childhood, his eyes carrying a kind of innocence that life had not yet stolen. She knelt beside him, pressing a few dull pencils into his tiny hands. "You won't ask for money," she said softly. "Just hold them out, and say it's for the sake of God's mercy." She knew that people's hearts softened at the sight of a child who didn't beg but only hoped. Musa nodded, though he didn't really understand why his mother's eyes looked so heavy, or why her hands trembled ever so slightly as she touched his hair. The little girl tugged gently on her mother's sleeve and asked in a small, uncertain voice, "What about our rich brother? Won't he come with us?" Munjin's lips twisted into a sharp, bitter smile. Her tone turned icy. "Oh, he'll come," she said. "But first, he needs to learn what life really costs." Her words carried both resentment and pain, a quiet wound hidden beneath pride. The children began their walk toward the road, each carrying their fragile hopes in tired hands. The sun was dipping low, painting their shadows long against the dirt road. From behind, Munjin's voice tore through the air like a whip. Don't you dare come back until every single thing is sold. If you do, you'll regret it. The children didn't look back. They just walked, small figures swallowed by the noise and heat of the city. When they disappeared from view, Munjin turned sharply toward the house and called out to Ilgar, her stepson. Her tone had changed again, from commanding to cold authority. She told him to go inside. Outside, a car was parked beneath the crooked tree, the lawyer's car. He had been waiting silently, watching everything through the glass. For a brief second, his eyes met Ilgar's, two worlds colliding in one glance, one filled with guilt, the other with confusion. Then, without a word, the man started his engine and drove away, leaving only the faint smell of exhaust behind. Inside, the dimly lit house smelled of soap water and damp cloth. Munjin didn't waste a moment. She shoved a rag and a metal bucket toward Ilgar and ordered him to clean every window and every door until they gleamed. Not a single speck of dirt, she warned. Ilgar hesitated, his voice trembling. I'm not a servant, he said quietly. Why should I do this? Her eyes flashed. Because if you want to eat under this roof, you'll work for it. Before Ilgar could answer, an old, fragile voice came from the inner room. It was his father, calling him by another name. Hassan, my son, come to me. I've been waiting. The voice was frail, but it carried warmth, the kind that had once filled this house before cruelty took its place. Munjin's expression darkened. She raised her hand, silencing him with a glare. Don't you dare move, she said coldly. I'm going out. When I return, I want this place shining like a mirror. If it's not, you'll regret it. Then she slammed the door behind her, her footsteps echoing down the lane. For a long moment, the house was still. The only sound was the slow ticking of an old wall clock. Ilgar sat silently, staring at the rag in his hands, torn between anger and sorrow. His father's voice broke the silence again, weaker this time, calling his name over and over. Then came a thud, a dull, heavy sound like something fragile hitting the ground. Ilgar dropped the bucket and ran into the room, his heart racing. There, on the cold floor beside the bed, his father lay motionless, his breathing shallow, his eyes half open. Ilgar knelt beside him, shaking his shoulders, whispering words that wouldn't come out right. Words of fear, of love, of a son's helplessness. The world, in that small, dim room, seemed to fall completely silent. In the meantime, Munjin moved through the narrow lane like someone airing secrets, telling her neighbor and friend every small detail of their life, as if confessing a triumph. Her voice was sharp with pride and relief as she shared how things were arranged, how the children had been set to work, and how the day would unfold. The neighbor listened, eyes bright with curiosity and a kind of cold sympathy that often follows gossip in cramped neighborhoods. Back at the house, inside the dim room, Ilgar turned to his father with desperate, burning questions, his voice cracking as he asked how a father could do such a thing to his own child, how his father could have given him away. The old man answered slowly and gently, denying that he had sold him for money, and explaining instead that no payment had ever been exchanged for the adoption. He had tried to pull Ilgar out of a life of crushing poverty. He spoke of a man from their village who had once worked for Bayaz Rahab, and of Behesh Sahib, a kind man without children, who had been looking to adopt. He reminded Ilgar that his mother had died soon after his birth, and that the neighbors had helped raise him for a while. Then fate had driven the old man to marry Munjin, who already had 2 children, and only the youngest child in the house remained with him. He explained that Musa was Ilgar's brother, while the other 2 children belonged to Munjin, and he admitted that from the beginning Munjin had never been able to tolerate Ilgar, so he had given the boy up to save him from hunger and hardship. Ilgar reacted with raw rejection. insisting that the man before him was not his father, and the old gentleman broke down, tears wet on his cheeks as he begged for forgiveness and whispered that before he died, he had only one wish: for his son to forgive him. In the meantime, Mungerine then returns to the house and finds the cleaned items left exactly where they had been placed, and a hot flush of anger rises in her. She begins to shout, calling for Ilgar. Ilgar sits beside his father while Mungerine moves toward them and begins to strike him. The blind father wails, begging them not to kill his son, but the pleas do nothing to stop the violence. Mungerine drags Ilgar outside and threatens him with a cruel promise. If he ever disobeys her again, she will strip the skin from his body. Ilgar stood there, eyes hollow and distant, seeing nothing and everything at once, while the house echoed with the sound of his father's helpless sobs. That night, under the thin glare of a single bulb, Mungerine moved through the small courtyard, handing out plates of food to those she claimed were entitled to eat. Noticeably absent from the circle were Musa and Ilgar. She instructed her daughter to take a portion of the meal to the old man she called father, and to bring Musa along so he could eat too. The little girl hesitated and asked whether Ilgar would be called for food as well, and Mungerine answered with a sharp, angry refusal. Ilgar was undergoing punishment and would receive nothing until he came to her and begged for forgiveness. She went so far as to say that if he starved to death, she would consider it one less problem to carry on her shoulders. The child obeyed and carried the food to the inner room, but returned soon with a quiet report. Musa was not there. Meanwhile, Ilgar had taken himself to the storeroom and sat alone in the dark, the hush of the cramped space pressing against him like a second skin. After a short while, someone knocked on the storeroom door. Ilgar rose and opened it to find his little brother standing there with a tiny scrap of bread clutched in his hand. Musa spoke in a bright, tentative voice, explaining that he had brought bread because his brother had not eaten since morning. Ilgar accepted the bread and began to eat, murmuring his thanks as he sat down, and the small boy replied that Ilgar was his true brother, reminding him that they shared the same father. Ilgar agreed softly, saying that they had only been raised in different homes. The child, full of innocent curiosity, asked whether Ilgar's things had been very expensive, imagining him as a wealthy boy, and went on to recount that their mother had sold Ilgar's phone and shoes for a sum of money. If the child had received that money, he would have bought a bicycle, for he longed more than anything for one. Ilgar listened in silence as the child continued, asking whether Ilgar had once had many toys. Ilgar simply nodded. At that moment, Mungerine reappeared, swept into the storeroom, snatched the bread from Ilgar's hand, and, handing a broom to Musa, rebuked the child for recognizing and sympathizing with his brother. She dragged Musa away by the arm and led him out, leaving Ilgar once again alone in the dim room, his small meal taken from him and tonight's supper denied. The next morning opened on a household moving with the rushed ritual of children preparing for school. Mungerine pressed 2 rupees into each small hand and insisted that the money must stretch to cover their tiffin. When her daughter protested that other children ate sandwiches and they wanted one too, Mungerine answered with a sharp denial, insisting there was no extra money and that what had been given should be used sparingly. The little girl replied by reminding her mother that Ilgar's phone had been sold for a large sum, and that some of that money could have been used for treats. Mungerine's response was curt: "Send the children to school now," and she sent them off, while Ilgar stood listening to every word in silence. Before leaving, Mungerine called Ilgar forward and, pretending to understand his secret wish to attend school like the other children, announced that he would be going to the same private school, but not to study. She made it plain that his role there would be to sell, not to learn. She produced a handful of pencils and instructed him to peddle them near the gates of the wealthy schools, selling each for at least 1 rupee, and to keep any extra that sympathetic buyers might press into his palms. All money collected was to be handed over to her, and not a single pencil was to remain unsold, or he would face harsh consequences. Ilgar protested that he could not do it. Mungerin dismissed him, mocked his weakness, pushed the pencils into his hands, and watched him step out into the noisy street. From a distance, the lawyer who had lingered earlier noticed Ilgar and quietly drove away. Alone with the weight of those instructions, Ilgar held the pencils and wrestled with what to do. Frustration rose in him like a furnace. In a burst of anger, he threw the pencils to the ground. Mungerin returned at that moment, grabbed him roughly by the ear, and dragged him straight to his father's room. There she forced him to look at the frail man who could no longer rise from the bed, explaining, cold and relentless, that she had been the one to bathe him, to clean up after the accidents he could no longer control, and to give him the weekly injections that kept him alive. She told Ilgar, without pity, that if a single dose was missed his father could die, and that she had shouldered the household burdens while his meager pension barely kept them fed. Her tone shifted from accusation to a brutal lesson in reality. She would not continue to scold him, but she expected him to act. If he truly wanted to help his father, she said, he should take the pencils and go sell them. Ilgar remained mute, the command settling over him like a cold, immovable sky. Ilgar stepped into the street, with a small box of pencils clutched in his hands. The morning air felt heavy, heavier than usual. As he walked along the crowded roadside, his steps slowed near a private school. There, with a trembling voice barely louder than a whisper, he tried to speak, offering his pencils to anyone who would listen. But shame burned quietly inside him. Every word felt like a weight he could hardly bear. Soon, a girl approached, curious, maybe even kind of first. But her tone turned sharp when she saw the simple pencils in Ilgar's hand. To her, they were nothing special, too ordinary to deserve attention. She picked one up, asked the price. Ilgar replied that he didn't know. She tossed one aside with a cold laugh, calling him something cruel, something that pierced through his chest like a knife. Ilgar stood frozen for a moment, eyes lowered, voice fading as he murmured to himself that he was not a beggar. Then he turned away, his small footsteps lost in the noise of the city. As he wandered down the wide, busy street, a flash of white caught his eye, his old school bus, the same one that once took him home every afternoon. Panic rose in his throat. He ducked to the side, trying to hide, but the bus stopped right beside him. Familiar faces stepped out, the same friends who once laughed and shared their lunches with him. But today, they didn't recognize him. One even pointed, saying he looked familiar, while another scoffed, saying there's no way they'd ever know a street beggar. The words shattered something deep inside Ilgar. His hands shook. The box of pencils slipped from his grasp and scattered across the pavement. Useless now, just like the dreams he once had. When he returned home empty-handed, his stepmother, Mungerin, rushed forward, smiling, expecting money, expecting success. But Ilgar's silence said everything. Her anger erupted when she heard there was no money. When Ilgar whispered that he had thrown the pencils away, her rage grew wild. She tried to strike him, but he ran straight into his father's room and locked the door behind him. His voice trembled as he spoke through tears, saying he only wanted to talk for 2 minutes before leaving this house forever. Inside, his father stirred weakly from his bed. His tired eyes softened when he heard his son's voice. Ilgar told him that he was leaving, but one day he would return. He would free his father and little brother, Musa, from this misery. He just wanted his father's blessing. The old man's hand shook as he pulled his son close, holding him tight, whispering a prayer, that wherever his boy went, may peace follow him, and may he forgive his father. Outside, Mungerin's angry shouts echoed through the hall. Ilgar unlocked the door, looked at her one last time, and said nothing more, only that one day she would bow before him. Behind her stood little Musa, silent, confused. Ilgar's eyes softened. He stepped closer, kissed his brother gently on the forehead, and then he left. Down the narrow path beyond the house, Ilgar walked alone, into the world, into the unknown. His pockets were empty, but his heart carried the weight of 1,000 storms. And that was the moment he truly understood how cruel life could be. Ilgar walked slowly down a familiar lane, one that once echoed with laughter, sunlight, and the sound of his own footsteps running home. And then he saw it, his old house, the place where everything had once felt safe. He stood still at the gate for a long moment, his eyes tracing the windows, the walls, the quiet emptiness inside. No movement, no faces he knew, only silence. He pressed the doorbell, and soon an old servant appeared. Haidar, the man who had known him since childhood. But time and sorrow had changed Ilgar's face, his clothes, his very presence. Recognition didn't come easily. Haidar's eyes narrowed with confusion, and his tone turned cautious. Ilgar's voice, soft but trembling, carried the weight of memory. Yet Haidar shook his head, saying the boy wasn't allowed inside. Even the request to call his mother met hesitation. Still, out of pity, the old man went in to try. Ilgar waited outside, heart pounding. The seconds felt endless. When Haidar returned, his face said everything before his words did. She refused. His mother, or the woman he once called mother, would not see him. Ilgar's breath caught, his body tense with disbelief. Before anyone could stop him, he ran through the half-open door, shouting for her. Inside, the air was heavy and cold. She stood with her back to him, her voice sharp and distant, telling him to speak quickly and leave. Ilgar's voice cracked as he tried to understand. What had he done? Why had she turned him away? He reminded her of his love, how he had once believed she was his real mother. He didn't want wealth or comfort or anything grand. Only a corner of that house, a small space to belong. Just that. But her silence spoke louder than anger. When she finally gestured for him to be taken away, something inside Ilgar broke. His tears fell freely as Haidar, trembling and helpless, approached him. Ilgar didn't resist. He simply turned once more toward the woman who had raised him, hoping for a final glance, a trace of kindness. None came. At the gate, he stopped for a moment and looked up at Haidar, asking softly what wrong he had done. The old man had no answer. He only opened the gate and stood there, eyes heavy with guilt, as Ilgar stepped out into the fading light. The door closed behind him with a slow, echoing click, a sound that seemed to seal an entire chapter of his life. Haidar watched through tears, unable to move. Life, he thought, can be unbearably cruel. Once that boy had been proud, bright, full of hope. And now, he walked away with nothing but pain in his heart and the dust of his past beneath his feet. Ilgar's feet dragged along the dusty road. The day had been long, merciless, and empty. His stomach twisted with hunger. He hadn't eaten a single bite since morning. The noise of the city faded into a blur until the aroma of cooked rice and bread stopped him in his tracks. Across the street, a small restaurant glowed with warm yellow light. Inside, a well-dressed man was eating, slowly, happily, every spoonful filled with comfort Ilgar could only imagine. His eyes lingered on that plate of food, and for a brief moment, he could almost taste it. His fingers reached instinctively for his pocket, searching for hope. But when his hand came out, there was just a single, lonely coin, 1 rupee. It was all he had in the world. He turned away quietly. Once upon a time, he could have afforded anything: food, clothes, comfort, even laughter. But now, even the smell of food felt like a cruel reminder of how far he had fallen. A smile, weak and broken, appeared on his lips, not from joy, but from disbelief at his own fate. He kept walking. Not far from there, 2 rough boys blocked his way. They laughed, shoved him lightly, and snatched a single coin from his hand. He didn't even resist. Maybe he was too tired. Maybe pain no longer surprised him. When they left, Ilgar simply stood there for a moment, staring at his empty palm, as if his last piece of dignity had been stolen too. The sun dipped low behind the city's gray skyline. His legs trembled. His body felt heavy, hollow. Finally, he sat down by a wooden post near the road, his back pressed against it. The world moved past him. Cars, people, laughter, none of it touched him anymore. He just sat there, breathing quietly, eyes half open, feeling the weight of his loneliness. After a while, his weary steps carried him to a quieter place, far from the chaos of the streets. A graveyard. There, among rows of silent stones, he found one that belonged to his father. The sight of that name carved in stone pulled every hidden ache to the surface. He knelt, touched the cold earth, and whispered softly, asking questions that had no answers. "Why did you leave me, Father? Why did you give me away?" He cried, his voice breaking into the still air. He told the grave he had no home left, no food, no place in this world. His tears fell onto the soil, mixing with the dust, as he begged for strength. His small frame trembled, not from the wind, but from the weight of everything he had lost. Then, faintly, from behind him, a familiar voice called his name. Ilgar turned. It was Yusuf, the same boy he had once humiliated, the one who had been mocked, insulted, and treated like nothing. In that moment, the past came rushing back, the cruel laughter, the taunts, the shame. But Yusuf smiled gently. He didn't remember the cruelty, or perhaps he had forgiven it long ago. He told Ilgar that his own father was buried nearby, and that he often came here to pray. There was warmth in his words, something Ilgar hadn't felt in a long time. Exhaustion finally overcame him, and he lay down beside his father's grave, closing his eyes in peace for the first time in days. When he awoke, he was lying on a soft couch in a small, humble home. Sunlight streamed through thin curtains. The sound of prayer echoed softly. Yusuf's mother, a frail woman with a cane beside her, finishing her namaz. Yusuf sat nearby, a book in hand, quietly waiting. When she turned and saw Ilgar awake, her eyes filled with light. Despite her weakness, she greeted him with a smile, warm, gentle, almost motherly. She called him son and invited him to eat. Ilgar hesitated, but the scent of food was too much to ignore. Yusuf took his hand and led him to the table. There was simple food, bread, rice, lentils, but to Ilgar, it felt like a feast. He hadn't eaten in a day, maybe more. His hands trembled as he began to eat. Too fast, too desperate. Yusuf and his mother watched in silence, their hearts heavy and tender at once. Then Yusuf softly said, "Bismillah." Ilgar froze for a moment. He had forgotten that word, forgotten the simple act of gratitude. Slowly, he whispered it too, "Bismillah." And then, for the first time in a long, long time, he smiled. In that little room, under the warm light of evening, 3 people sat together. No wealth, no luxury, no blood ties, just faith, forgiveness, and the quiet comfort of kindness. Evening drifted softly over the quiet neighborhood. The air was still, touched by the last gold of the fading sun. Inside a small, dimly lit room, the day's noise had settled into silence. Papers, worn notebooks, and a cracked ink pen lay scattered across an old wooden table. There sat Yusuf, bent over his books, the faint scratch of his pencil the only sound in the room. His concentration was pure, almost sacred, as if finishing his homework was a duty to life itself. In the corner, Ilgar sat quietly, tugging at the torn edge of his pants, trying to hide what could not be hidden, a reminder of the world's indifference. His fingers moved slowly, carefully, as though sewing together his pride with every pull of the fabric. When he finally put his pencil down, he walked over to Ilgar. His young heart carried a quiet guilt. He hadn't spent time with his friend because of all the schoolwork piling up. But Ilgar only smiled, brushing it off, as if kindness came naturally to him. To Yusuf, Ilgar wasn't just a friend anymore. He was like an older brother, someone who had done more for him than anyone else could. Yet, deep inside, Ilgar carried shadow of regret. memories of another time, another version of himself that had once mocked this boy for being poor. But Yusuf's smile melted that guilt away. To him, the past didn't matter. Only the bond they shared now did. And that night, under the fading light, the two boys decided to face the next day together. The next morning, sunlight spilled over the little town as Yusuf started his shift at the water shop. He was young, but the shop owner trusted him like family. Every drop of water he carried was a piece of his honesty, his strength. That day, the owner called out. A delivery was needed at Street 16. Yusuf, with his small shoulders, lifted the heavy water bottle, far heavier than his age could bear. Ilgar offered to help, but Yusuf just smiled and said it was fine. They walked together through the narrow alleys, greeting everyone along the way. The people loved Yusuf, his warmth, his humility. Ilgar watched, quietly amazed, realizing how respected this little boy was. When he saw the weight Yusuf carried every day, his heart tightened with concern. The boy's steps trembled, his shoulders shook, yet his spirit didn't break. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, both of them sat by the roadside, dust, sunlight, and sweat mixing into something deeply human. And there, as Yusuf wiped the sweat from his brow, he began to speak softly, not to anyone in particular, but as if his father could still hear him. His father had been a builder of minarets, tall, proud towers that kissed the sky and echoed the call to prayer. He used to tell Yusuf, "Son, the sweat you shed for honest work carries the scent of flowers." Those words had stayed with him, shaping the boy into who he was now. Strong, humble, unbroken. When Ilgar wondered why the rich didn't seem to sweat for their wealth, Yusuf only smiled, saying that true peace comes from what's earned through effort, not ease. His father's death had placed the family's weight on his tiny shoulders, but he carried it with pride, never complaining, never losing faith. Later that day, they reached the house on Street 16. The owner paid Yusuf, adding a few extra coins. Yusuf refused at first, saying he already earned his wage. But the man insisted, a gift, not payment. So Yusuf accepted it quietly and placed the money in a small separate pouch, saving it for something only he understood. When Ilgar asked why, Yusuf simply smiled. Then, the two friends walked off side by side, their laughter soft, their bond unspoken yet stronger than words. In the hum of the afternoon heat, two boys, one rich with heart, the other learning what true wealth meant, disappeared down the sunlit street. Later that day, Yusuf and Ilgar walked through the dusty lanes until they reached an old woman's tiny house. Her name was Hanifa. Everyone in the neighborhood called her Aunt Hanifa, though she lived completely alone. Yusuf handed her a small bundle of bread and dried food, saying it was sent from the shop. The woman's wrinkled face softened with gratitude. Every week, someone sent her food, yet she never knew who. And every week, Yusuf made sure she never went hungry. As she took the bread with trembling hands, she whispered a prayer, a quiet blessing that seemed to rise straight to the heavens. But Yusuf wasn't done. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the small pouch, the same one where he kept his tip money, and placed it gently in her palm. She looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes, asking why he burdened himself so much. Yusuf just smiled and told her to keep him in her prayers. To him, that was worth more than gold. Ilgar stood nearby, watching in disbelief. The boy had just given away everything he had earned. When he asked why, Yusuf explained softly that money was never his to begin with. It was a gift from God, passing through his hands so it could reach someone else in need. "We don't create our own fortune," he said. "We only deliver what we've been trusted with." Ilgar looked down at Yusuf's worn-out shoes, torn at the edges, and asked why he didn't buy a new pair instead. Yusuf laughed lightly, saying the comfort of a full stomach for someone hungry gave him more peace than any new shoes ever could. And in that moment, Ilgar said nothing more, because sometimes silence is the only way to honor goodness. When they returned to the shop, Yusuf told his boss that more deliveries were waiting. The old man looked at him with worry. The boy had been working non-stop, sweat dripping from his brow. "Rest a bit, son," the shopkeeper said. "You're wearing yourself out." But Yusuf only grinned and replied that honest work was never a burden. It was worship. Even Ilgar's eyes softened at the boy's strength. The shopkeeper, amused, handed Ilgar a bottle and told him to try carrying one himself. Yusuf showed him how to lift it properly, and though Ilgar struggled, he refused to give up. They walked together through the narrow streets, two boys with heavy bottles and light hearts, laughing as they went. But life, as always, had other plans. As they made their deliveries, a sleek black car followed them quietly, the lawyer who once worked for Ilgar's family. He watched from a distance, half smiling, half curious, and made a call to someone, his voice calm but unreadable. Meanwhile, Ilgar went alone to deliver the second bottle. The sun burned hot above him, sweat rolled down his neck, and his steps grew heavy. Just then, a speeding boy on a bicycle collided with him. The bottle slipped from Ilgar's hands and rolled across the street. He chased after it desperately, but before he could grab it, it struck someone's leg. Ilgar froze. The face that turned toward him was painfully familiar, his old friend's. They recognized him instantly and began taunting, reminding him of the arrogance he once wore like armor. Shame burned in Ilgar's chest. He tried to walk away, whispering that he didn't have time to argue, but the bullies pushed harder. Then Yusuf appeared, running to his side, his fists clenched, his stance unshaken. The boys saw the fire in his eyes and backed away, fear replacing cruelty. Yusuf placed a hand on Ilgar's shoulder, steadying him. "No more fear," he said without words. Ilgar's heart ached, not from their insults, but from the memory of who he once was. He told Yusuf he wasn't angry, only thoughtful, because in that moment, he realized something powerful. Money had never given him peace. Kindness did. Wealth could buy comfort, but never worth. Arrogance, he thought, is the price the rich pay for forgetting what truly matters. Yusuf placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled, the kind of smile that healed more than words could. And together, they walked on, two friends, bound not by fortune or class, but by faith, honesty, and the quiet strength of doing what's right. The sun slowly sank behind them, leaving their shadows long and golden, two silhouettes walking towards something better. The golden afternoon light spilled softly across the little shop floor as the owner began distributing wages. He handed Yusuf his pay first, then turned toward Ilgar with a gentle smile and slipped a few folded notes into his hand, notes that trembled slightly in Ilgar's small fingers. "This," said the man kindly, "is the reward for your own hard work." For a moment, Ilgar simply stared, unable to speak. The money seemed to glow in his palm like something sacred, not because of its value, but because of what it meant. It was proof that he had earned something through sweat and effort, that he mattered in this wide, uncertain world. A quiet smile touched his lips, the kind that rises not from excitement, but from peace. He whispered a humble thanks, his heart swelling with warmth. As he and Yusuf walked home, counting coins beneath the fading sky, every step felt lighter. 8 rupees. To others, it might have been nothing, but to him, it was the beginning of a dream. Yusuf laughed, teasing that one day Ilgar would be rich if he kept saving like this. But Ilgar only smiled and said he didn't want to be rich in gold. He wanted to be rich in kindness. He believed that when one gives from the heart, heaven gives back tenfold. That's the kind of wealth he wanted. Yusuf looked at him with quiet admiration and whispered that he was already rich, at least in spirit. On their way back, they stopped to buy food and gifts for Hanifakala's home. Ilgar's face glowed with joy as he said spending his first earnings for others brought him more happiness than he had ever felt before. He promised himself that he would keep working, save more, and someday pay for his father's treatment. Yusuf smiled and said that he had already spoken to the school. From tomorrow, they would start going together. For a moment, it felt like life was finally unfolding in their favor. A little brighter, a little kinder. But life has its own way of twisting the story. Just as they turned the corner, a black car glided to a stop beside them, its engine purring like a silent warning. The lawyer was not inside. Only his driver stepped out, face unreadable. He asked Ilgar what he was carrying, and the boy, innocent and proud, said softly that it was food for home. The man nodded, asked him to hand everything to Yusuf, and before Ilgar could react, the driver's hand clamped around his wrist. Yusuf shouted and tried to pull him free, but the car doors slammed shut. The locks clicked, and as the car sped away, Yusuf's cries vanished into the distance. Inside, Ilgar called out again and again, but the driver stayed silent until finally he spoke. "Don't you recognize me? I'm your lawyer's driver." Confused and frightened, Ilgar fell quiet. Minutes passed before the car stopped, in front of a house that felt like a ghost from another life, his old home. Hader Cha-Cha stood at the gate, smiling warmly. "Come out, little master," he said, his voice carrying a strange comfort. Inside, Ilgar saw his stepmother rushing toward him, tears streaming down her face. She wrapped her arms around him, whispering how much she had missed him, begging for forgiveness. His younger siblings clung to him too, laughter and tears blending in the air. And then the lawyer spoke, his words soft but steady, telling Ilgar that before his death, Basra had written a will. He had known what might happen and had left everything, the house, the property, all of it, to him. But he had asked that the truth be revealed, only when Ilgar had grown wise enough to carry its weight. "That moment," said the lawyer, "has come." Ilgar sat in silence, eyes glistening, and said gently that he wished to share half of it with his stepmother and siblings. He didn't want anyone to feel left behind. His stepmother broke down, her tears flowing not from guilt, but from love reborn. Everyone smiled through their tears, and as she held him close again, Ilgar felt the warmth of something far greater than wealth, forgiveness, belonging, and the quiet peace of finally coming home. The night had fallen softly over the narrow streets when the story returned to Yusuf's small home. The little boy sat quietly, his eyes clouded with worry. His mother came near, her voice calm, yet trembling with hope, reminding him that the police had been informed and that God would protect his friend. But Yusuf could only shake his head, whispering that they had taken Ilgar right before his eyes. Not just a friend, but a brother of the heart. His mother held him close, trying to ease the ache, when suddenly a horn echoed outside. Yusuf ran to the door, breathless, and there, under the porch light, stood Ilgar. But this Ilgar was no longer the same. His clothes fine, his shoes polished, a car gleaming behind him. Yusuf's eyes widened, but before he could speak, Ilgar smiled gently and said that money does not change people. It only shows who they already are. True wealth, he said, lives in the kindness we share, not in what we own. He told Yusuf that he had come with one wish, that Yusuf and his mother would now live with him, as his family. His voice carried the warmth of gratitude, the promise of a bond that neither distance nor time could break. Yusuf's mother's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy. She agreed softly, and as they stepped into the car, even the lawyer smiled, for he knew that something greater than fortune was at work that night. In another corner of the city, however, fate was writing a different chapter. Ilgar's real father, frail and trembling, asked Munzarin for a glass of water. Her response was harsh, bitter words for a man who had no strength left to defend himself. When the glass slipped and shattered, her anger turned cruel. But just as her hand was raised again, a quiet voice stopped her, Ilgar's. Standing in the doorway, dressed with dignity and calm, he looked at her not with hatred, but with silence. At first, she mocked him, accusing him of theft. Yet when the little girl beside her whispered that Ilgar had truly become wealthy, Munzarin stepped outside and saw the car waiting. and with it, the lawyer. Something shifted in her eyes. The mask of pride broke. When she returned inside, her tone had changed. She called him my dear child, offering food, water, and warmth, as if trying to wash away years of bitterness. Ilgar knelt beside his father, who wept softly and called him by his birth name, Hassan. Ilgar promised that he was there to take him home, to heal him, to rebuild what life had broken. Later, as they drove away, the lawyer asked what should be done next. Ilgar spoke with quiet conviction. His father's treatment would come first, his siblings' future next, and even Munzrin would be cared for if she showed love toward the family. For, as he said, forgiveness is the finest form of wealth. When asked why he would forgive the one who had caused him pain, Ilgar smiled faintly and said, "Because once, I too was proud. And yet, I changed. Maybe she can too." Time flowed gently, carrying with it the echoes of everything Ilgar had endured. One quiet morning, he found himself standing once again inside the same old classroom where his journey had begun. The very room where his innocence had once been shattered and rebuilt. Dust floated in golden shafts of sunlight through the window, and the air smelled faintly of chalk and old memories. Ilgar's heart pounded softly as he stared at the blackboard, and there, in bold white letters, stood a single word, "Sorry." The teacher entered, pausing mid-step. Her eyes widened, not in confusion, but in quiet understanding. She didn't need to ask what had happened, nor why. The words spoke louder than any confession ever could. Slowly, she walked toward him, her expression softening with emotion. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around him, not as a teacher embracing a student, but as a soul recognizing another soul's redemption. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Realizing your mistake, my dear, is the first step toward true greatness." For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The echoes of their silence carried something sacred, forgiveness, perhaps, or the tender weight of peace finally found. Ilgar closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of that moment seep into the cold corners of his heart. He had learned what no book could teach, that wealth means nothing without kindness, and success is empty without love. And so, the story didn't end with claps or celebration. It ended with truth, a quiet, enduring truth that speaks to every heart that's ever longed for meaning. Money, as necessary as it is, will never be enough. It can buy comfort, yes, a soft bed, a full plate, a roof to call your own, but it can never buy peace. It can never mend the cracks inside a broken heart, or replace the warmth of someone who truly cares. True richness doesn't come from what you hold in your hands. It comes from what you hold in your heart, from compassion that asks for nothing in return, from humility that allows you to forgive even when you've been hurt, from courage, the quiet kind, that helps you choose kindness even when the world offers cruelty. Because in the end, every coin loses its shine, every luxury fades with time, but a kind word, a helping hand, a heart that forgives, those are treasures that never lose their worth. So, if Ilgar's story teaches us anything, it's this: never let the hunger for wealth steal the gentleness of your soul. Work hard, earn honestly, love deeply, and stay kind, even when life tests you the most. For in kindness lies the only fortune that truly lasts forever.